What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Unrestricted. Sorry, it's been around 2 weeks since our last episode. Me and Kyle both been pretty busy. I ended up moving to Phoenix, Arizona. I'm coming to you from there right now, and super excited to be back. We just had our fantasy draft, 12-man league, where we do 5 keepers. First time doing that for both of us, and so we're going to break down the ins and outs of the league, each of our teams. And maybe talk about some of the better opposing teams that we have in the league, and then also individual players, both from a breakout standpoint and an overrated standpoint. Thank you so much for sticking with us throughout the last few weeks and months. And we can't wait to get started.
Yeah, we took 1 week off due to being a little bit busy, but we've both been really excited to start talking about some fantasy content. I know we've talked about football for the last couple weeks, but we really wanted to kind of get a fantasy angle going this week, start integrating more content based around that, because fantasy football, obviously a big part of the NFL viewing experience for both of us. So we're really excited to kind of do a little recap from our Dynasty redraft hybrid draft that we had 2 weeks ago. So to start and kind of explain the rules and nuances of our Dynasty redraft hybrid league. So it's a 5-man keeper. You're allowed to keep 5 players from your roster. There's no restriction on how many years you can keep these players. If you want to keep a player throughout the duration of his entire career, that's allowed. It is a 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, 1 kicker, 1 defense. Pretty standard. PPR league, 1 point per reception, point bonus for long touchdowns as well. And I believe, we have 6 bench spots on the roster. So this Dynasty redraft hybrid is interesting because in a pure Dynasty league, you definitely want to prioritize youth, of course. You want to take guys later that maybe are in not the best position this year, maybe 3rd or 2nd on a running back depth chart, but have young upside, maybe an older back in front of them, and maybe would be a starter 2 years from now. But with a 5-man keeper, there's really not as much of a point in having guys like that, because if you drafted according to kind of the format, you probably have at least 4 guys that you're planning on keeping for quite a long time. I know my team is very much structured around the idea that there are 4 players that I'm planning on keeping for at a minimum 5+ years. So having those 4 players that I'm almost guaranteed to keep, you really aren't prioritized to fill out the rest of your roster with high upside, low floor guys. You kind of want guys who can maybe help you win this year or give you a little bit of a floor so your team doesn't kind of hit rock bottom if injuries were to happen, and can kind of keep you afloat. So I definitely didn't do the best job of that, but I think that that's the optimal strategy for something like this, a Dynasty redraft hybrid, where you can only keep 5. It's not even your whole starting lineup. So it's an interesting format. There's not a lot of content on the internet about leagues like this, and that makes for some pretty interesting discussions, and it's a pretty kind of nuanced league format, I think. So do you have any specific thoughts on the format of the league? I know it's pretty unique.
Yeah, so both coming in, first time doing it, you and I. My approach was very, very much so more towards the dynasty end. Just a full-on dynasty draft. I kind of approached it like that, having this being my first time doing it. So I definitely staked on some younger players and some. I definitely have too many keepers. Like kind of looking at my team, and so I think that'll end up kind of biting me in the butt later on. But I like the way I approached it, and I think that's why the 5-man keeper format is so interesting, is because you really do have to toe that line and do the dance between players now and players later, which I actually think is kind of cool, because it's almost more, it feels a little bit more, I don't want to say realistic, but that's kind of the way you'd be thinking if you were an actual general manager a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I guess so. And so I think it's very interesting. I can't wait to see how it unfolds. And yeah, I'm super excited to break down each of our teams.
Yeah. So we could just start with your team. Do you want to give a little recap of your draft, what you were thinking in the draft? Maybe start with your starters, talk about your bench, maybe talk about guys who you've identified as being in that camp that I was talking about, of guys you're planning on keeping for 5+ years, and just kind of recap your draft.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I ended up pulling the 3rd pick, snake draft, of course. And so like we keep saying, hadn't done it before, so I started doing a few mocks and really looking at the player projections and where people were valued, and I was just surprised to see how different it was. Like Bijan's going late first in typical regular redraft leagues, and he was slated in as the third best prospect, and I really teetered around the idea of maybe potentially getting a receiver, hoping that maybe Jamar Chase fell to me at 3, but I ended up just deciding I want to take the long-term route, and I think Bijan's going to be super good, so I took him at 3. But my strategy the whole time, I guess I didn't really press on it super hard because I've been pretty busy, but I wanted to trade back to actually the same spot Kyle got to because I wanted to get Garrett Wilson super bad. I thought he was one of the more fun picks in the first round, and I think definitely kind of undervalued because he hasn't had that insane season yet because he's only had 1 year to show it out. But I think with Aaron Rodgers this upcoming season, he's going to be insane. And so that was my initial approach, but I couldn't end up trading back. So started with Bijan and then snaked around to my second round pick, and I went more short term, which I think was one of my better picks in the draft, and I took Devontae Adams. I think he's still got 2 to 3 years left before he plateaus and kind of gets more towards not necessarily retirement, but back half to the end of his career. And so I love that pick. Love Devontae. He's one of my favorite players of all time. And then getting on to my third round pick, easily, not even close. Everyone in the league knows it took me like 10 to 15 minutes to take this pick. The biggest dilemma I've ever been in a draft. I had no idea what I should do. I was teetering between the idea of taking Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, Justin Herbert, because I knew I wanted to get my QB early and have them for the long term and have it be one of those top 5, top 6 QBs that it also falls on the young end of the spectrum, under 25 years old, under 26 years old. But at the same time, there were some like better players available, I guess, like upside guys. I wanted to get ETN there, but he was already taken 2 picks prior. That was kind of the way I planned it out. And it was just weird. I didn't know what to do, but ended up taking Justin Herbert, which I had not planned on doing at all. And I was just wrestling in my own head between him and Lamar. And really what it came down to is, and we talked about this in our most recent episode, is him having a new offensive coordinator and that upside potentially putting him in a position to be an MVP candidate. I think he could be a really, really high level guy. And hopefully put up numbers similar to that of Mahomes. And so that's my intention there. And I think I'll have him for at least 5 years. He's definitely one of my keepers, so I'm excited for him. And then my next 3, I guess 5 picks I loved. This is where I really think my draft came together. I had, approaching these picks, I knew exactly who I wanted, 6 or 7 picks leading up to it. And the guy I wanted ended up falling to me. And typically that doesn't happen in a draft like this, especially 5 picks in a row. So with my 4th round pick, I got Kenneth Walker, who I'm stoked about. I love the way he runs. I love his patience. Barring his ability to stay healthy, I think he could be really, really dangerous, even with the depth that they added with Zach Charbonnet with the Seahawks. But I'm really excited about him. And then with my 5th round pick, by far my favorite pick, and my favorite breakout player, unbiased, just being on my team, Brandon Ayuk. I think he is bound for a monster season, similar to that of what Debo had 2 years ago. I think there'll be shades of that. I'm not saying he's going to be playing out of the backfield or anything, maybe 1 or 2 plays in the season, but I think his ability to separate is absolutely exceptional. It's top 4 or 5 in the league, and I think that's really going to show and it's going to flourish. And I just can't wait to watch him. I think he's going to be my prediction is roughly 1,200 to 1,300 yards, 8+ touchdowns. I think he's going to be great. I think he's going to be a top 5 receiver this year. And I guess I kind of reached on him based off of where his projections were. And I ideally would have liked to get him as my 6th round pick, but I just said I'm going for it. And then 6th round pick, I got Christian Kirk, who I also think could replicate what he did last year. I just think he's in a long-term contract, big contract with the Jaguars. Every piece around him offensively is from an infrastructure standpoint to continue to produce even better. And he's young. So excited about that one too. And then with my 7th round pick, love that he fell to me. even though it's a gamble, I thought I needed to take a risk, especially in the short term. And that's what kind of this was, is Alvin Kamara after his, I believe it was a 4-game suspension, 3-game suspension. I think 3, right? Kyle, do you know?
Three, yes.
3. So that's not terrible. I'm willing to forfeit that and fill in another guy at my flex spot, and hope that Kamara can revert back to his PPR status as just a PPR king. And I love Kamara. I love watching him run, I think. And also another thing too is like people are kind of dogging on his personal stature and who he is because of situation he found himself in, and I guess rightfully so. When anytime you make decisions the way he didn't get put in that type of situation, but I think the way he took responsibility in a recent interview and took full responsibility, I think shows a lot of character, and I think he's a good dude, and I'm rooting for him, even though a lot of people may not be right now. 8th round pick. I almost reached on him with the Kamara pick, but I decided to wait it out. And this is another risk, short-term and long-term risk. More so a risk for the short term because typically rookie tight ends are not particularly effective. But coming out of the Bills camp, Dalton Kincaid has been absolutely a lot of great stuff coming from Josh Allen and a lot of players talking about him. Even Dawson Knox, who's his direct competitor, has had nothing but great things to say about him. And even if he ends up being a 8-point per game guy this year, 600 yards, like I'm okay with that because I think in the long term he's going to be really good. And there's been comparisons to Kelsey. Not going to get ahead of myself and think like that. I just think that's unrealistic. But same time, I think the mold of really good route running, body control tight ends like the Kelsey mold, I think he fits that. Will he? And I really, really do hope that he pans out to be that same mold, even if the production isn't quite the same. And so super excited for him. And then from there on out, I just banked on long-term stuff. 9th round pick, Mike Williams, hyped for that. I just think that's a good pick. He's had some good years in the past, a little bit of injury problems, but I mean, for a 9th round receiver, like that's a really, really good value. And then at 10th pick, I took the boy CJ Stroud, who I've been raving about for 3 years, and I've had his back in the debates and everybody doubting him after that IQ test and all this stuff in the pre-draft process, and I have not left my word on backing CJ Stroud, and so I still think he's going to be really good. I'm excited for him, even if it isn't immediate, and I'm super excited for that one. But that's where, like I said at the beginning of this, I have too many keepers because will I even be able to keep Stroud? And if Stroud has a down season, like I'm going to want to keep Bijan, Devontae, Herbert, Ayuk, and then either Walker, Christian Kirk, or Kamara, or maybe even Kincaid. Like that's where it becomes really difficult, right? And so I maybe drafted more so for like a dynasty league. And then I'll quickly say the last few. So I went Jalen Hyatt, Kendre Miller, Steelers D, Josh Downs, and then Jason Myers. I think the Josh Downs pick could end up being really valuable if he's as good as everyone's saying he is. I believe it was Reggie Wayne who said he was the best receiver in this year's draft and that he's going to be extremely good. That's pretty credible dude to say it, even if he is Colts biased. And for the 14th round pick, I think that's pretty cool. I'm totally willing to take that gamble there. And I took just kind of as a joke, just to be funny. I took Chase Cota as that in that same slot, which would be super cool if he ended up panning out and being productive. But just like a home body, I had to support the boy. So yeah, that's my squad. I'm excited for it. Kyle, is there anything that stands out to you about it? Anything you like? Any doubts?
Yeah.
Don't feel free to voice any criticism, as I'd love to debate about it a little bit.
So, yeah, starting with Bijan at 3, I think is the right move. Best running back in this year's class. Should be in line for a huge workload. Should have roughly a 5-year prime starting this year, which is better than you could say for most running backs. Obviously, running backs from last year's class, it wasn't too strong of a class for running backs. I know you got probably the best one in the class. So that's another strong point to your team. I think it's just youthful running backs. Ken Walker is an interesting pick. He's not someone that I love in redraft, but he was catching my eye in keeper just because of his age, and he's younger than almost every other running back that people drafted. And like I said, people in last year's draft class for running backs, you got Breece Hall, who's got a little bit of injury concerns now, maybe an ambiguous role with Dalvin Cook potentially coming in. You got Dameon Pierce, who's solid, definitely a great back, but I don't think any of us think that Dameon Pierce is a better pure runner than Kenneth Walker. Bring in Charbonnet, it's a little bit scary. That's why I don't love him in redrafts. I think Charbonnet is a great prospect. I genuinely believe that he's a very good running back prospect. But in the scenario where Charbonnet was to go down or vice versa, the other one I think is an RB1 for the rest of the season. And I think long-term Kenneth Walker is a really good play here because even if I just look, what's the floor for Kenneth Walker? I don't see a world where he's not good despite Charbonnet taking work in the receiving game and a little bit of work on the ground as well. I still think Kenneth Walker is just such a good pure runner that he's going to find his way to fantasy production.
Yeah, it's purely predicated on him being healthy, right? If he's, because the eye test and his ability, his vision and his balance and his pace, he's got it. He's got it. He just got to be on the field. Even if Charbonnet, that's why I was comfortable taking that pick, is because I love the way he runs. He actually reminds me a little bit of Le'Veon Bell, a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
The way he stops behind the line a little bit, and his upright running posture, I think is kind of similar. But anyways, continue.
Another player that I like a lot that you drafted is Brandon Ayuk. I saw a stat when I was looking at kind of dynasty content. People really loving him in dynasty. I will have to confirm this, but I believe that since entering the league, his fantasy points per game have been extremely similar to DK Metcalf's, who we'll get into a little bit later, but is seen as a lot better of a value, a bigger name recognition than Brandon Ayuk. And that's really interesting to me because they're quite opposite in that regard. I think Brandon Ayuk falls on the more undervalued side, while DK values a little bit on the overvalued side. And something that was brought up in that dynasty video that I was watching was that I believe Brandon Ayuk is in his contract year, maybe his 1 year after this, but his contract is coming up. And while he is in a very good situation with the Niners, because with Kyle Shanahan and the type of player that Ayuk is, Shanahan will scheme him looks. He will get him open. He'll be putting good opportunities. If Brandon Ayuk was to go somewhere else in the offseason, let's say the Carolina Panthers, for example, he is going to be drafted as a top 15 receiver in redraft next year. He's going to have a higher chance of having a massive target share, and that's something that we haven't seen from Brandon Ayuk in his career thus far because he's played on a team with so many weapons like San Francisco 49ers. So if Brandon Ayuk was to have a kind of season like you were talking about with around 1,200 plus yards, and then he was to go somewhere else, somewhere young and building that is looking to bring in a young receiver like the Carolina Panthers, say Bryce Young shows a lot of promise this year, but they're just lacking a top true alpha target. I think Brandon Ayuk is pretty much one of the top receivers in line to be on the move and to find himself in a situation like that. And I think in a keeper league, that's extremely valuable. I think Brandon Ayuk is probably someone that you want to have in your long-term plans on this roster. Looking at, one other thing you said, and I did this too, so I'll talk about this a little bit. Drafting too much in like the dynasty style and maybe not emphasizing enough the idea of the five keeper. I did the same thing, and yes, I agree. Like you have Stroud and Herbert, and there's really no world where you keep both, I would say, or you'd have to trade one out. Is probably what would happen if Stroud was to break out this year and you were to feel really good about him long term. You probably would look to move Herbert this year and cash in on that value. If not, Stroud is probably not going to be capped on your roster next year. I think it's not that bad because regardless of if you can keep all the guys on your roster, you want players who are going to have more value at the end of the season than they have now, because you can work some trades, 2-for-1s, 3-for-1s, kind of consolidate some of that value. Maybe a guy's quarterback didn't work out. Maybe it's a team that has an older quarterback like an Aaron Rodgers that needs a long-term guy, and Stroud maybe wins Offensive Rookie of the Year. And that's a perfect kind of trade piece. You can trade Stroud and let's say Kenneth Walker for a running back upgrade or something like that. I think having players in any sort of keeper format that are going to accrue value and be better in be drafted higher in next year's draft than this year's draft is a good thing, because you can pull off some of those trades for the end of the season and in the off season. So yeah, I'm a big fan of your team. I think you did good at pretty much every position. Youthful running backs, like I said, I think that's really important because they have such a short shelf life. You have a guy who has 0 seasons in the NFL and 1 season in the NFL, so it's pretty much as good as you can do there. If I was to kind of be critical of any pick, it would be Devontae Adams. I'm definitely lower on him than you just because of Jimmy Garoppolo's deep ball. That's kind of my number one concern. Derek Carr is obviously not too significant of a quarterback upgrade from Jimmy Garoppolo, but he did have a really good chemistry with Devontae Adams, and he did have a really good deep ball, which allowed some really big games from Devontae last year. But obviously, Devontae Adams is one of the best receivers in the NFL, one of the best receivers I've seen in my lifetime, and it's a pretty safe bet to bet that he's good. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I agree with you on the quarterback point because I was thinking about this the other day. Devontae and I think he's still going to be good. Devontae Adams is this type of guy who, no matter who's the quarterback, could be the worst quarterback in the league, and he's going to pull away 1,200 yards in his sleep if he plays 14, 15 games, just because he's that good. But Devontae Adams' entire career, he's had his college quarterback, most recent one, Derek Carr, who he's obviously spent a lot of time with, and they're like really, really good friends, and Aaron Rodgers. You really can't, like, you could make an argument that those two separate pairs, are two of the best chemistry pairs in the last 15 years. Like, you say what you want to say, but like Derek Carr and Devontae Adams, they have an insane amount of chemistry. Like, they
100%.
know what's going to happen and exactly where he's going to be in that same fashion. So actually, I agree with that. I think that's a totally fair criticism. And partially, I don't necessarily care because I just want to watch him play. That's how much I like Devontae Adams. That's how much I appreciate his route running. That even if he's not worth that second round pick, I'm excited for it, and I'm not going to regret it as long as he's healthy.
Yeah.
So,
I guess my last question for you would be, obviously, way too early to project this, but if you were to kind of anticipate your 5 keepers at the end of the season, who would those 5 players be?
So it's really, really dependent on, I mean, obviously Bijan, and I would probably say Devontae Adams are like pretty much locks. I'm confident enough to say too that Ayuk's going to be pretty much a lock to be a keeper. So that's 3. The quarterback situation is what's going to matter. If Herbert, with the new OC now and all the weapons he could ever need, and hopefully a healthy line, right, with Slater, if he's not a top 5 QB, I'll probably stick with Stroud, especially if Stroud is Rookie of the Year candidate and showing what I think he is. Like, I'm that hyped about Stroud, and just like the fact that Herbert doesn't have a ton of running upside, which is crazy considering how much of a freak athlete he is and how big he is. I'm telling you right now. So like, my high school was in the same conference as his high school, and I grew up watching him play against my high school. Some of the runs he had were so immaculately terrifying, like him absolutely truck sticking our biggest defender. 6'6", 230-pound frame, 240-pound frame. Like, the dude, if he decided to, could be like a really, really effective runner. And maybe that's in the cards. We haven't seen him play in an AFC championship game. I would not be surprised if we see that, and all of a sudden he has some crazy 40-yard touchdown run, and everyone's like, whoa, where'd that come from? Well, pay attention to what he actually is. He just doesn't do it, but he has the capacity. And maybe that's something he'll develop a little bit, but I mean, that's something to be seen. And then probably Kenneth Walker, or if I would hope Dalton Kincaid. If Dalton Kincaid is like 1,000-yard guy this year, I'm so happy it's not even funny. Like, that is like what puts my team from good to like, I'm so excited it's not even funny, like immaculate.
Yeah.
Because if I could have a guy that's that young and that has that much promise at tight end, like that's the most difficult position to fill by far, not even close. And so if I could have my receivers, star running back, QB, and then him all locked up, it makes things a lot less stressful. Not that fantasy is particularly stressful unless you're going to be last place and have to do a punishment. But so I'm definitely that's like my thought process as of right now, but that could change.
Yeah, if Kincaid was to have a 1,000-yard season, I think he'd probably be like a 3rd rounder in redraft next year. So I think that'd be massive for long-term value.
He might be a 2nd rounder if that was the case.
Yeah, especially on the offense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So That's Trent's team. I'm kind of going to do the same thing, break down my draft strategy. Um, just give a little recap of my players. So, like Trent kind of hinted at earlier, I had the sixth overall pick, drafting in the middle, just 12 picks in between all of mine. Obviously, a snake draft. So, I like this spot mainly because I thought this was going to be a very unpredictable draft, and drafting in the middle is just the most neutral. It's the most moderate kind of position to be in. So, like Trent said, the first five picks were pretty standard, I thought. It went Justin Jefferson, obviously. Jamar Chase followed him. Trent took Bijan at 3. CeeDee Lamb was the fourth pick, I think. Those top three are pretty obvious. That's 4 is where it gets a little bit ambiguous. I think CeeDee Lamb's a good pick. He's still very young, not as young as Chase or Jefferson, but just right up there. Probably has 8+ years of prime left, and is already broken out on a great offense, has a lot of stability. I think CeeDee Lamb was a great pick there. And then Patrick Mahomes right before me. That's an interesting pick. I like it. I think Mahomes is the safest bet for a long-term quarterback, and locking that up is very, very valuable. However, I would say that doing what Trent did and taking Justin Herbert in the third, or doing what I did and taking Joe Burrow in the third, maybe is better value-wise long-term. I don't know that the gap between Mahomes and, let's say, Joe Burrow is going to be that big to the point of 2 rounds of value. So I don't know. That's kind of how I approach that. But took Garrett Wilson at 6 overall. I think he's obviously has a massive ceiling with Aaron Rodgers this year. I think he's going to finish as a top 5 receiver in fantasy. He's only 1 year into his career. He has a very bright future ahead of him. The only kind of question mark would be, what does the quarterback situation look like post Rodgers? Rodgers probably not going to play for too much longer, probably only a handful of years. So, and we saw Garrett Wilson obviously had a great rookie season. He won Rookie of the Year, but the quarterback play being so mediocre as it was really hindered his upside and really limited his fantasy production. So that's a fair concern, but I think a few years of Rodgers will put this franchise in such a more stable position to kind of address that position post Rodgers, and maybe Zach Wilson is the guy at that time, spending a few years behind him. Maybe they bring in another free agent or a trade target. So I'm not too concerned, but it's a valid criticism. Do you have something to say about that?
You watched the first episode of Hard Knocks yet?
I haven't. I've only watched clips. I need to watch it.
You got it. It's good. I'm excited for them. I think the whole dynamic of that team, I think, is fascinating. And
Yeah,
like
I've
Wilson, Sauce, A-Rod, the whole team. I love it.
yeah, I'm excited. The Jets are just a really cool team. One of my favorite NFL teams to favorite storylines to kind of follow this year, and I'm excited to watch Hard Knocks because a lot of my friends have been watching it and have been saying Rodgers is the coolest guy ever. It's
Yeah.
just like Salah, everything about this team.
Yeah.
They're
It's
kind
a
of
starving
looking.
fan base too. Like
Yeah,
they deserve it.
yeah,
And it's the
definitely.
city of New York. It doesn't get better than that. I would love to see them at the pinnacle, at the top.
Yeah.
That'd be
So
cool.
yeah, I'm really excited for Wilson this year, and then the Jets as a whole. My second pick, I was absolutely stoked that he fell to me. Jahmyr Gibbs, I thought for sure he was going to go in the early second. I was holding my breath in the draft room when a few guys were drafting before me. I'm like, oh, this is where Gibbs goes. I'm going to have to pivot. Pick right before me, Mahmood took Tony Pollard, which I was ecstatic about. I think 26-year-old Tony Pollard on a franchise tag is insanely less valuable than Jahmyr Gibbs in his first season. So I was
That was my initial reaction too. I was like, back-to-back franchise tagged running backs.
yeah, I
Shout
just
out
like
Mahmoud Mustafa.
I just think with Pollard, I mean, I am really excited for him this year, but I think he's just the Cowboys' plan is probably just going to be to run him into the ground this year, give him a billion touches, and then I don't know that the long term. Yeah, I think that's it for him. Jahmyr Gibbs, on the other hand, maybe it has a few less touches this year. You kind of hinted at. We talked about this before. Jahmyr Gibbs, you think Dave Montgomery's going to take a lot of work, and I think that's very fair. But that's fine long term, in my opinion. Jahmyr Gibbs is 21 years old, and if he doesn't have a ton of carries in his rookie year, I'm fine with that because I think Jahmyr Gibbs, we've talked about him before on the podcast. He sees Alvin Kamara. I think it's so cliche to say this at this point because every fantasy and every football outlet has been talking about this, but David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs is Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram and Kamara's rookie season. I think they're both going to, I wouldn't say I'm predicting them to both finish as RB1s, but I think that's very much in the range of outcomes. I think Gibbs getting a ton of targets, getting a ton of work in the receiving game, and being like a more of a big play guy, and then Montgomery handling a lot of goal line work and early down work. I think this offense was so good on the ground last year with 2 far inferior running backs. Their line is fantastic, one of the best in the league, and their offense overall is going to be vastly improved. So I think there's plenty of work to go around for both of them. And yeah, I really like Lions this year.
I had something to add, but I'll talk about it when we do the overrated and breakout players.
Cool. So, without saying, I obviously plan on keeping Garrett Wilson and Jahmyr Gibbs long term. Obviously, combined, they only have one season in the NFL. These guys are going to anchor my running back and wide receiver positions for the foreseeable future. It's very much in my plans to build around those two guys. Third and fourth pick, I wanted to address quarterback and tight end. Quarterbacks, there was a little bit of a run going in the third. I opted to take Joe Burrow. I think him versus Lamar Jackson, who was taking his range. I just Burrow. This maybe hasn't been proven thus far with the injuries that he sustained, but I think long term he should have a longer career than Lamar just because of the nature of his play style. I think that Joe Burrow is going to lead a high volume passing attack for a very long time coming. I think getting him in the middle of the third is very good value because, like I said, Patrick Mahomes was taken the first. I'm not sure where Josh Allen was taken. I believe in the second.
Really early second though.
Yeah, and the second. I just think getting a guy like Burrow, and it's honestly, I have the exact same things to say about Herbert. They're very kind of similar fantasy players, I would say, at similar stages in their career. Getting guys like Burrow and Herbert in the third, it really gives you a lot of value at quarterback. It gives you a long-term plan at quarterback. You're not going to have to take shots on rookie quarterbacks who maybe struggle out the gate because you have guys who are going to play for the next 10 years. They're going to be high volume passing. They're going to throw a ton of balls. They're going to throw long balls. They're going to have amazing young receivers who are going to make plays for them, especially in Burrow's case, playing with Jamar Chase. It's going to be one of the most dynamic duos in the NFL for a long time. And I obviously have a ton of confidence in Joe Burrow going forward. Drafted T.J. Hawkinson in the fourth. Again, really excited that he fell to me. I'd considered trading up in the fourth to grab Mark Andrews, and I opted to wait because I thought that either Pitts or Hawkinson would fall to my pick. And I knew I wanted to secure the tight end position because I think that you kind of talked about this with Kincaid. Rookie tight ends historically don't do too good, and I thought that if I could secure quarterback and tight end for the long term, I think it's easier for me in a 5-keeper format to find guys to plug into RB2 to wide receiver 2 and kind of build my roster around that, having just an anchor RB1 that I'm confident for the next 5 years with Gibbs, wide receiver 1 confident for the next 8 years with Wilson, and then Burrow and Hawkinson anchoring the tight end quarterback position. I think when I can keep only one more after that, I think that it'll be a lot easier for me to find a guy, maybe a rookie next year or a guy who wasn't kept, that I can just plug into that RB2, to that wide receiver 2, to that flex spot. I think that that's kind of a good structure in a 5-keeper league. So with that, I took a few shots following those 4 picks because I'm very confident that those 4 are going to be my keepers. And then I kind of left the 5th spot open because I want to leave space for a few players to break out and kind of earn that 5th keeper spot on my roster. So I reached a little bit in the 5th. I took Zay Flowers. I definitely look back on that and think it was a little bit of an overdraft value-wise. However, I'm such a believer in like his talent as well as his situation with Lamar Jackson and the Ravens this year. I think he can be what Hollywood Brown was on the Ravens in his rookie year. And if he was that, I think that easily slots into my 5th keeper. He'll be my wide receiver 2. He's in his rookie year, like I said, should be very good for the foreseeable future. And Zay Flowers, if he doesn't work out, that's okay because I did take shots on a few other guys that I think can fill the spot. But I think that's a really good player to kind of give him. He should be my 5th keeper. He has the opportunity to kind of play his way into that spot on my roster. And there's not really many guys in that range that I feel more confident in betting on, like kind of hitting his ceiling and achieving that level of production. You really like Zay Flowers. Do you have anything to say about that?
Oh, dude, I don't think he reached it all. I actually think that was about right. I remember when you took that pick, I was like, oh, that's perfect. Like, I would have done the exact same thing. Absolutely no question in that exact same spot. If he would have fell to me, I would have taken him instead of Christian Kirk. And I really, 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 really like Christian Kirk. But I said it our last episode, he's going to be really, really good. And he does not have anybody to compete with for targets.
Yeah.
Yes, there's Odell right now. He said he might retire after the season. He made comments about that. And even if Odell's there, that's better for him. Takes away target share. But with him and then Mark Andrews, that's just like a perfect little duo. I think, and I hope that can put them into a contention standpoint, the Ravens, because I always said, I love Lamar and I want to see him succeed. And I love Zay Flowers. He's fun to watch, and I like the way he plays. So I
Yeah,
like
I
that.
think I think the Ravens passing offense should be much improved this year. Obviously, bringing in a new OC and then, yeah, just bringing in Odell for at least a year, maybe a 1 year rental, but at least Odell for a year, I think is going to be able to give them some production. And then drafting a rookie receiver, a top three receiver off the board. Obviously, Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman's still there, so I think the Ravens passing offense. I'm a believer in it. Maybe a bit of a controversial kind of situation. I know not everybody will believe in a Lamar Jackson offense's passing volume, but I think that that's a good gamble to take. After that, I took back-to-back Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which is interesting because I'm definitely not a big fan of Baker Mayfield. I'm definitely not a big fan of this team, but I am a big fan of both these players, and it's Chris Godwin and Rashad White. Chris Godwin, I took because after taking Flowers, I wanted something a little bit more stable to kind of keep my team from just being too young and inexperienced and bottoming out because of that. Chris Godwin is extremely consistent. He played with a very decrepit Tom Brady last year. His average depth of target was so low. He was getting targets at the line of scrimmage consistently, and he was still turning it into 15, 18, 20-point games. He was a target machine. I just really believe in Chris Godwin's talent. Obviously, 2 years removed from the knee injury. Normally, you're much better. You're much more ready to go. 2 years, 2 seasons after a major knee injury like that, I think very early into last season, it was obvious that he wasn't fully healthy. And then towards the end of the season, I think he looked a lot better. So Chris Godwin, also underrated young. I believe he's only 26 or 7 years old. Not as young as Garrett Wilson or someone like that, but he still has plenty of time to still be good. And I think he still um, could play his way into my fifth keeper spot, but I think he's much more likely to be kind of my flex this year that kind of just puts up consistent points, but maybe isn't on my roster for the next coming years. And then Rashad White, no competition for targets or carries in this backfield. Obviously, they could still bring in a guy, Ezekiel Elliott or someone like that, and that would kind of crush Rashad White's value. I would definitely be a lot lower on him if they were to do that, but until they do that, I mean, he looks to be in line to be a workhorse running back, and this offensive line is pretty solid. I was talking to one of my friends about this year, and while I'm not too big on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he said, "Why can the Buccaneers not be this year's Seattle Seahawks?" And I thought about that, and there's definitely similarities. I mean, everybody's projecting them to bottom out with a big quarterback change. Nobody obviously believes in Baker Mayfield, similar to nobody believed in Geno Smith last year. They have good skill positions, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, somewhat similar to the weapons that Seattle had. Rashad White, a young running back who has showed promise but hasn't really gotten a chance to be like a workhorse yet. And then pieces on the line and the defense that could still be good. Obviously, coming off a Super Bowl only a few years ago, and then if their draft picks work out this year, I think they could win their division. I mean, I would probably project them to be last in the division. I'm not too big of a believer in this, but I definitely think it's in the range of outcomes for this team to have somewhat of a Seattle Seahawks from last year type of trajectory and surprise a lot of people because there's still a lot of pieces on this team that are good, and it's just probably going to come down to quarterback play, which admittedly could be very bad, but we'll see. After that, I kind of did what Trent talked about, and I took too many shots on young, high upside guys. I think this definitely could come back to bite me. My bench filled out with Devon Achane, rookie running back for the Dolphins, Elijah Moore, Marvin Mims, both Chicago Bears running backs, Roshan Johnson and Khalil Herbert, and then I took Dak Prescott to back up Joe Burrow. Obviously, Joe Burrow could be in danger of missing some time, so I thought I just need a high floor quarterback to get me over the hump if Burrow was to miss time. So with those five bench players, I do like all of their upside, but I definitely see a world where these guys just don't end up contributing or maybe break out, but not enough to be productive this year. And then they're just off my team next year because of the five keeper restriction. So looking back on it, I think I would have maybe drafted one or two more high floor players, maybe not taken the Bears running backs because I'm not sure if they're going to be too. I think like a good case, a good scenario would be they're solid this year, but I don't know that they can really play into like could they be more attractive to me next year than Zay Flowers is the question. And I think it's possible, but I think it's kind of unlikely. So if I was to give like one of my favorite bench players, it would be Elijah Moore. I think that's the guy who's most likely to contend with Rashad White and Zay Flowers as my fifth keeper. I think Elijah Moore has a ton of upside. He's still extremely young. Was in an absolutely horrible situation for him. Moves to Cleveland, where Deshaun Watson, we'll see. Deshaun Watson, obviously extremely talented, but haven't seen it in a while with him. Need to see that he's able to get back to that level because it's just been so long. But Elijah Moore finds himself in a situation where it's a good wide receiver room, but he could definitely emerge as the clear two. And if you believe in the talent of Elijah Moore, which a lot of people do, it's a very trendy thing to do. I think this is a situation where he could definitely break out. So that's kind of my thoughts on my team. Trent, what kind of stands out to you for better or worse?
Yeah, so I'll start with just a little bit of criticism, or maybe just I'm gonna actually ask you like the Rashad White one is the only one that like makes me like second guess maybe the reasoning behind it. Like why? What's the reason behind Rashad White for your 6th round pick? Just like walk me through the rationale for him. Just
Yeah.
because maybe it's just because I haven't paid attention to the Bucks offseason a ton. I guess it's his production maybe.
I mean, the biggest thing is just workload.
Workload.
I
Yeah.
last year Rashad White showed a lot of promise as a pass catcher. Not too great in the red zone, but like I said, he has virtually no competition for carries or targets out of the backfield. And
Yeah.
I think they're a top team that could be interested in bringing in a free agent, but maybe this team doesn't want to do that. Maybe they're not in a position where they think signing an Ezekiel Elliott really does anything for this team. And so maybe they just want to give the reins to Rashad White and let him have 15 carries a game and 5 targets a game. And
Okay.
with that, there's not a lot of running backs who are 24 years old and are in line for 20 touches a game. And
Yeah.
that's kind of my rationale with Rashad White. Obviously, the argument against him would be the efficiency. I mean, this running game is probably not going to be one of the more efficient in the NFL. This offense isn't going to score like a top 10 rate in touchdowns or anything like that. So that could definitely be concerning with him. But my biggest rationale is the workload. I think just not having any competition and being young is something rare for running backs. There's not too many running backs in that situation. While he is on a bad offense, or what projects to be at least, I think the workload is enough to give him value.
Yeah. And another thing is just I feel like since Brady's gone, like so many running back targets are going to be like taken away just from the nature of not having Brady there, and then almost an elevated version of him where he's super old. He's 45, and
Mm,
he's dumping off even more. So maybe that played into a little bit of the target load. But like you said, the opportunities there, and maybe he rises to the occasion and he ends up being good because there were definitely flashes where he was impressive. But that directly ties into probably my favorite pick on your team, sleeper wise, like towards the end of the draft. I love Khalil Herbert. I think that's an interesting pick, and I think and the other thing that's good about that too is you have insurance because I think Roshan Johnson is really good prospect too. I was watching like the bootleg pod and they were raving about
mm,
him.
yep.
And so if the Herbert thing doesn't pan out, then all of a sudden Roshan Johnson comes in and maybe he ends up being a keeper level guy if he's a 1,000-yard guy. But if that's not the case, I'm very confident Khalil Herbert's going to be 900-yard guy, like pretty much guaranteed if he plays 14, 15 games and he's getting 15 carries,
Mm,
which I think could totally happen because when he did it last season, he was really productive. And that was on a
yeah.
way worse Bears offense with probably an even worse defense. Um, I mean, I guess they had Roquan Smith for a little bit last year, but I think it'll be relatively improved. So I like that pick, and I actually think he may end up being your starter if Rashad White ends up being not particularly good. And then
Yeah.
I also like Marvin Mims. I think that's a good. I think the two like Zay Flowers and Marvin Mims. I think those are two really good risks to take on a receiver because I mean I think this is a really talented young receiver class, and I think just the overall level of receivers nowadays is so high that to gamble on a rookie receiver like that, I'm for it. Even if this was a redraft league, like I don't hate that pick at all, and so I like that part. And then Joe Burrow, the long term is just a beautiful thing. Garrett Wilson is going to be fun at the end of the day, like similar to the Devontae Adams reasoning I said. Like you're going to have
Yeah.
fun watching him. That's why I wanted to trade back and get him because I want to watch him for the next 5 years because I like him a lot. He's fun to watch and he's smooth, and I think he's an interesting player. Same thing with Gibbs. He's a fun player too. Hawkinson, only thing that concerns me with him is I haven't really seen O'Connell's usage rate of tight ends at a super high level, at least between the Rams and last season. And I know Hawkinson had that insane game where he had, I think, 200 yards or whatever it was. And hopefully that's a predicting point, because if you could have a guy at his age at tight end for the next 3 years, I mean, that's like we were saying, like if you get that position filled and it's a plus, like that's a massive deal, like a massive deal. Because the tight end, it's usually just like it's 27 of them are negatives to your team, right? And two of them are neutral, and then 2 of them are positives. Like 3 of them are positives. Like there's not really. It's a very drastic difference between tight ends, and and so getting one of those guys that could be a stud is like just like every fantasy manager's dream.
Especially with the keeper, especially with the keeper form. We talked about that with Kincaid, but I think the good tight ends, like you talked about, they're going to be on people's rosters. I mean, people are going to keep Kyle Pitts. They're going to keep Travis Kelce until he probably retires, to be honest. They're going to keep Mark Andrews. And so I think if you don't have one of those guys, you're just going to be throwing darts every single year. You're going to be throwing darts at Dallas Goedert. You're going to be throwing darts at David Njoku. And that I have always hated that in fantasy. I've always hated having a back end tight end that I have to just hold my breath if he's going to have a 4-point game.
It's torture.
So it's absolutely
that
awful.
May be me. I got a rookie there, and I have no backup right now. So let's see. We'll see how that ends up panning out. But just quickly, won't get too far of a tangent. Speaking of Pitts, like when is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? I don't think it's. I personally do not see it happening with current coaching staff. At the end of the day,
quarterback play.
From what I've seen the last 2 years, even though his rookie year was impressive, still didn't get put in that great a position to be like a super high level guy, but we'll see.
And that's, I mean, I don't hate on Bijan Robinson at all, but I was seeing and reading things about why people should be skeptical about him. And I don't agree with this, but they were saying everybody thinks Bijan Robinson is in line for this guaranteed workload. They do have Tyler Algier, who is a good running back, and they drafted a tight end higher than any tight end has been drafted, and they don't use him right. Why are we so confident that they're going to use Bijan Robinson right? And I thought that was a decent point because the coaching staff is just so incompetent. But I just believe in the talent of Bijan. So I don't agree with that overall. But that was something that kind of had me thinking about that situation a little bit.
I actually don't fully disagree with that. I don't really have a whole lot of confidence in their coaching staff. And that's one thing that definitely is a negative when I look at my team. But hopefully the Kamara pick can be insurance for that. So even if definitely that ends up being the case, I have 5 keepers outside of him, in my opinion, that I'm comfortable with, even without seeing any of them play, because I have a lot of rookies. So if Kamara could come in and be putting up 14, 15 points a game, I'm good. I'll be fine. Even if I whiffed on that pick, I thought it was the right decision. I thought I have every reason. I mean, you look at his college career and the position he's in, and the fact that they do just kind of only run the ball, and they do it successfully anyways with Algier. Maybe that's a positive, kind of what you said. The fact that, and this is no knock on Algier, but the fact that Algier can have a lot of success and Cordero Patterson can have a lot of success in that in their running system, especially considering Cordero had never had that type of production before, and at this age too, that could be a positive. That because they do know how to get production out of running backs at the end of the day. And they do scrap together weird wins, even if it's not pretty, which it definitely isn't. It's not a pretty offense or a great offense to watch by any means, but hopefully Bijan's talent can make it that way. Almost think Adrian Peterson with the Vikings. Even if the offense isn't particularly creative, get it in that guy's hands and it becomes great.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah, for sure.
So,
any final thoughts on my team or your team?
I think that's about it. I think we covered a lot, got into some depth. So I think it's a good time for us to transition into other people's teams and maybe just talk about our each of our individual favorites. If you wanted to start that off.
Yeah. So my favorite team outside of obviously mine years, who we just talked about, would be Wiley's team. And I can just read off his roster really quick. Quarterback, he's got Tua. Running backs, he has Eckler and Ramondre Stevenson. Receivers, he has Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel, and Amari Cooper. Tight end, Dallas Goedert. Off the bench, he's got Geno Smith, Damian Harris, A.J. Dillon, Mike Evans, Juju, and Dalton Schultz. Obviously, this team is very win-now oriented, but I think that's okay. He's got a really strong running back duo, in my opinion, in Eckler and Ramondre. And Ramondre is a little bit controversial this year. I think the Patriots are another team that is a top candidate to bring in one of those free agent running backs, but similar to Rachaad White, but just better because Ramondre is just a better runner than White. until they do that, Ramondre is in line for a massive workload. And he should get a ton of targets. He got a ton of targets last year. That should continue. Mac Jones obviously going to not have the highest ADOT. Eckler, once again, should score a ton of touchdowns. He's Austin Eckler. Should get maybe not as many receptions as in years past, but I don't think that's the worst thing. If the offense is more efficient, I think the production could not see as much of a fall off, even if the receiving workload decreases because they're going to score more, and Austin Eckler is their best red zone option, even in the new offense with the new receiver. So I think this running back duo is going to put up a ton of points. Tua, if he can stay healthy, he's definitely a very strong QB option. I think he's just a tier below like Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields in that tier. He's still young, obviously, could be on a trajectory to not play as many years, but if he has a healthy season this year, all of those worries are kind of gonna be out of people's mind. And just the nature of the Miami Dolphins is just to have to score a ton of fantasy points. Having Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, who can just take massive slants to the house, they can get open down the field. Tua's going to score long touchdowns. He's going to have games where they're in shootouts and he has 400 yards. I don't think he really loses much at quarterback, despite not having one of those big name MVP candidate guys. Receivers, he has Tyreek Hill, so obviously a stack there. I think that stack is going to win him games when the Dolphins get in the shootout, and Tyreek has a monster performance. Love Tyreek Hill. Think receiver one is in his range of outcomes very much this year. Deebo Samuel too. Deebo Samuel's interesting. Maybe wouldn't have been my pick at this spot. Probably my least favorite spot on his team, but Deebo is going to be used in Shanahan's offense effectively. If he can stay healthy, if he can be on the field, he's going to score touchdowns. He's going to have a lot of yards. He's going to have receiving yards, rushing yards. And I think as his flex or receiver too, I think you're getting production there. Dallas Goedert, good tight end. He doesn't fall into the camp of the Pitts and the Hawkinsons and the Andrews, but he's in that next tier with like Pat Fryermuth, probably leading that next year, I'd say. Amari Cooper at flex. Love Amari Cooper. He's the definition of consistency. But you look at all these players, and like we said, this is very win now oriented. There's not a lot here. I think almost pretty much all of these players are at their ceilings, or their ceilings are in the past. I don't really see Austin Eckler being better than he was last year. I don't see Tyreek Hill being better than Ramondre. Would be the one who maybe hasn't reached his peak, hasn't reached his ceiling, has another kind of level to get to. But that being said, these guys are all really good right now. And week in, week out this year, I think Wiley has a better team than most. I think these guys are just going to put up more points than maybe someone like my team who has a Jahmyr Gibbs, who has a Zay Flowers in the lineup, who definitely could just not get the workload that his guys are getting out the gate and just aren't as experienced as, let's say, Austin Eckler and Amari Cooper. You know that Austin Eckler and Amari Cooper are going to be putting up a ton of points, and that makes the team really dangerous this year. I think he's a true contender, and while the long-term outlook isn't that strong, I think in five-man keeper, me and you both kind of overvalued that aspect a little bit, and I think he'll be able to figure it out. So I really like his team. I think it's a true contender this year.
Yeah, if I had to put money on it, I'd probably say he's got the best odds to win the league. Even considering I'm going to choose a different team as my favorite, just to be a little bit different. But I think his odds should be the highest. I think he's going to get 11 wins in his sleep. Like I would be shocked if he didn't have 10 to 11 wins or more. Like,
I agree. Simply, honestly.
Hill, Eckler, and if Deebo is a 1,000-yard guy again, like that, just those three. If those dudes each have 20 points in 1 week, which I think will happen a lot, like it's so hard to beat a team like that. He's simply going to score a lot of points.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree with that rationale. The team I'm going to choose is Luz. He had the 12th pick. I actually think he did probably the best job or one of the best jobs at win now and win in 5 years. Like I love what he did. I mean, having the 12th pick is always fun because you get to kind of pair players together. But he's got Kelsey, never has to worry about tight end as long as he's healthy. I mean, he's got 2-3 years at least of still doing what he's doing. Diggs, gotta love Diggs, one of my favorite receivers in the league too. I mean, I don't need to say anything about him. He's that good. Jigba, which is totally like I love the fact that he went win now, long term, and could potentially help you win now still. He's going to be really good. He's going to be successful. I mean, nothing but great things coming out of their camp, and just watching him in college, like it was obvious, like he's going to be a dude. And then the past of Ohio State receivers being successful, I just it's inevitable. Trevor Lawrence, he's going to be one of my breakout players that I'll talk about, so I won't fully immerse myself into that right now, but super high on him. He's going to have monstrous seasons in his future and will be an MVP candidate, especially with the core of between head coach and offensive playmakers, and just being a young team with an edge. Like they've got a lot of years ahead of them of success. So, only pick that I'd say is maybe a little bit overvalued is Jerry Jeudy. This is crazy because I was the dude who while he was at Alabama, I was saying him having 1,400 yards is such a given and so guaranteed that I don't even need to state it. Like I thought he was going to be for sure a stud in the NFL, and I thought it was the most surefire thing ever. Right, it's the same rationale I had for Jamar Chase. I thought like he was for sure going to be insane, and I just simply have not seen it, and I just don't know if we ever will, if it's ever going to all come together. And I would probably say I'm leaning towards it won't. It just I don't know what it is. I don't know if he's not physical enough of a guy. I don't know if it's just what it is about him. He has too many drops, and just like it, maybe it's a lack of focus. I don't know. I'm not in the receiver room or in their locker room, but from outside looking in, it just doesn't seem like things have clicked or that they're gonna click. Aaron Jones, I like the pick, 6th round. I think that's super valuable. I'm really interested in that one. And then Dalvin Cook, if he signs to the Jets or signs to one of these teams and is a borderline 1,000-yard guy, like that's a really good duo at running back situationally. And then going all the way down to like Charbonnet, like hopefully he pans out and he's a long-term option at running back. But only criticism is like on this topic is does he have long-term running back assets? Not really, but at the end of the day, he's going to have opportunities to draft that in the following year. So I think he'll be fine there. I love the Brandon Cooks pick. I think he could be a 1,000-yard guy this year. I guess I'm a little biased as an Oregon State fan, but he's the surefire number 2 in Dallas, and they need that. They need that second option. They're just simply better because of it. And I actually think he's a factor that not a lot of people are talking about. I mean, Dallas they were 12-4 last year, correct? Just to verify.
Yeah.
They're 12-4 last year. I think Brandon Cooks would be a massive difference maker. Massive, massive, massive. And then them just like fully committing to Pollard, I think will also just help the trajectory of that team. And he'll have fun rooting for him because he's a massive Cowboys fan. So look at that.
Yeah. I mean, I like Brandon Cooks better than Jeudy, not going to lie. I think he should be his starter on the flex.
Yeah. Or DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah.
I mean,
honestly.
dude, he's still DeAndre Hopkins. He knows that division, too. He's the king of that division. And it's a bad, bad division.
Yeah. One of the worst. Worse than
That's
AFC.
something I haven't even really thought about until as I'm saying it right now. He knows that division. He's the king of that division, and it's terrible.
Yeah.
he may have a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns. What if DeAndre Hopkins is a top 5 receiver this year?
Then, yeah.
I'm taking a bold prediction right now. I could see it happening. I'm not going to fully commit myself to it, but you heard it here first. He could be a top 5 receiver this year. 100%, no question about it. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
If that happened, he has the best team. I'm very confident in it, even over Wiley. And then just quickly, I'm going to just run through Gavin Meter's team, who had the first pick. I just think honorable mention. I want to say his. I think it's really, really good. Don't get me wrong, but past his top 4 core, there's definitely a decent drop off. But if one of those guys hits, if like one of his rookies hits, or Treylon Burks or Quentin Johnson or Rashee Rice, he's going to be really valuable. But with his top 4, he has Jay Jettas, Cooper Kupp, ETN, and Justin Fields. 3 of those 4 are definitely going to be absolutely filthy this year in Jefferson, Kupp, and Fields. Does ETN take a leap? Because if he does, that's another team. You don't want to face those 4 guys in a week. You simply don't. It's just like, how are you going to outscore those 4 guys if they all have 20? Like you're just kind of done. But then it's where the only reason I'm not outright selecting him over the other 2 is just the depth at the end of the day. But we'll see. I also think Kmet could be pretty good at tight end. I think that is actually kind of a sleeper tight end pick along with Waller. I think both those guys could end up being top 5 guys. I would not be surprised at all. And and end up being a huge value and make them not have to worry about tight end as we've been talking about. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's all I got when it comes to that topic. So
Yeah, just really quickly, I'll talk about Meteor's team too. Komet, I was definitely pretty critical of that pick during the draft. Not a big Komet fan. Definitely think he got overpaid contract. But yeah, you're right. It could work out there. And having a tight end on that contract kind of ensures a long term, at least a certain level of production, even if that's not like a high end fantasy starter production. He does have two players on here that are my overvalued players, and I think that's kind of where he loses me because when he got Cooper Kupp in the second round at the turn, I was like, oh my god, he just started with Justin Jefferson and Cooper Kupp. Like that's so broken. That's going to be 50 points so many weeks. I just I just think after that, I think there were better running backs than ETN. I'll talk about ETN in a second, but not my favorite. Madison, again, I in that range of kind of mid round running backs, there are ones that I like a lot better than Alexander Madison. And then Treylon Burks as well. I don't really see it, but I don't know. We'll see. Depth, I think, is a concern, but like you said, just Jefferson and Kupp is going to win him weeks. Justin Fields will also win him weeks. ETN, maybe. We'll see. That's kind of the tipping point for me with his team. But yeah, that's kind of all I have on that topic. We can now transition to our final segment where we're going to be talking about a few kind of breakout candidates that we haven't discussed so far, and a few players that we think are overvalued. So I could start with my breakout players. I'll just name them and kind of talk a little bit about each. My three big breakout players, and I wanted to get kind of a range in terms of ADP. I didn't want to take guys that are being taken too high. So I think starting like 7th round ADP, I think is where he's going. Jordan Addison. Not too hot of a take. A lot of people are really excited about Jordan Addison this year. Kind of the perfect landing spot for him in the draft. High volume passing offense. Not too much competition for targets outside Jefferson and Hawkinson. Pretty consolidated passing attack. And then just his profile as a receiver fits what this team needs just so much. I think he can absolutely be a league winner. It was something my brother just talked to me a few hours ago about. He thinks he's Juju the year that AB was just coming off his best year, and then Juju had extremely productive rookie season alongside him. I think that's very similar situation. Similar kind of
comparison.
Similar kind of offense, I guess, with old Big Ben, or not as old Big Ben, but older Big Ben and current Kirk Cousins. I think Addison is going to be an absolute monster. I think we're definitely going to be talking about him as probably like a wide receiver 2 being drafted next year in like the 3rd round or something. So love that. I think he's my favorite rookie receiver, probably outside of JSN, but maybe even above JSN from a fantasy standpoint specifically. My second breakout player is Evan Ingram. I really like the Jags offense, and I think he's the one I like most on it from like per value, if that makes sense. Obviously, Calvin Ridley, ETN being drafted in the 3rd round, Evan Ingram being drafted much later. I think Evan Ingram is probably the best tight end, maybe Dallas. He's in that second tier that I talked about with like Pat Fryermuth and Dallas Goedert, but I think he could surpass those guys a lot. He had a lot of flashes last year as Lawrence kind of picked up speed towards the end of last season. And if you think that Lawrence takes an MVP leap, if you think that this offense is going to be one of the best in the league, I think Evan Ingram is the guy who's kind of clearly in line to be a huge beneficiary of that. I think Evan Ingram has a great profile as a player. The Giants weren't using him right for years, and it looks like he may have developed something with Trevor Lawrence. So I think he's my favorite. If you don't get one of those top 3 tight ends in redraft, if you don't get Andrews, Hawkinson, or Kelsey, he's my favorite to take later. I love the upside of Evan Ingram. He had some monster games last year, and I think we could be in line for more. And then my last one is a lot more of a sleeper. He's a backup running back, so a lot lower floor, but it's Samaje Perine. Sean Payton wants to run the ball this year. He wants to have a very precise ground game to complement what Russell Wilson did. They don't just want to air it out with the current state of their roster. And Javonte Williams is coming off a major knee injury, and even if he wasn't, I don't think it's a pure workhorse role for him. I think Samaje has a role regardless. He was a very good backup in Cincinnati whenever Mixon was out or Mixon was not playing as well. Samaje Perine always looked good on the ground to me. That's just an eye test thing. It's not backed up by anything because he obviously didn't have a very big opportunity in terms of carries and touches in Cincinnati. But I think Samaje Perine's a great back, and given a solid role as a kind of 1B to Javonte, I think he could easily outperform his ADP. And if Javonte, he obviously is coming off the knee injury, if he's not fully healthy or if he was to suffer another injury and Samaje was to take the kind of workhorse role over for a few weeks, I think that could be a guy who, a classic situation where the backup running back takes over as the starter for a few weeks and is putting up top 8 running back numbers week in, week out while the starter's out. So Samaje, one of my favorite late round running back targets for redraft and Dynasty, probably not as much, but I think he's gonna easily outperform his ADP this year. So what are your thoughts on those players and who are the guys that you think could break out?
Yeah, I think you covered like pretty dang thoroughly all the dudes you said. So I'm just going to transition into my guys. But yeah, I like all the dudes you said, especially P. Ryan. He was one I didn't initially think of when I was doing this. He just kind of slipped my mind. Didn't really think about it when I was looking at the draft board. But I think he's going to surprise some people, I think, just kind of as you were explaining it. But I'll start with just like back-to-back Jaguars guys. I think it's funny. We have 3 Jaguars guys between the 2 of us. That's going to be a fun team. I mean, if
I have one in my overrated, so it's even more interesting.
Exactly, and I know exactly who it's going to be. So, so first one is Calvin Ridley. Don't forget who Calvin Ridley is. Like everybody out there, 1,200 yards in his sleep, top 3 route runner in the league. Hasn't had injuries since. I mean, it was a gambling thing. Like, don't forget that. Like, he's still the same Calvin Ridley, considering he's still been working it at everything and keeping up his preparation. But inserting him into the Jaguars, what they were last year in the back half of the season, terrifying. Oh, very interesting team.
Yeah.
I'm definitely rooting for them. It's going to be really fun to watch. Easily maybe one of the 3 most entertaining storylines and teams in the league. Then transition to that. I mean, man, at the top of all of that is Trevor Lawrence. I think he has MVP caliber seasons, if not MVP winning seasons in his future, if not near future. And I think this year is the start of that. I really, really, really do. I cannot wait to see him take that leap and fulfill the anticipation he's had since he was a freshman in high school and show the world that he is one of the 3, 5, maybe even 2 best quarterbacks in the NFL, which nobody's talking about yet. But I think after this season, they will be. Or at least I hope so.
Okay, really quick question. We don't have to go too much into this, but just because you've talked about both these players on today's episode, who do you think is more likely to finish higher this year, Trevor Lawrence or Justin Herbert?
I would definitely say Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, I would say Trevor Lawrence. More likely. I would say more likely just based off of that's kind of based on the fact that the Chargers still have Staley as their head coach. I can't say I fully believe in what I've seen from him thus far. That concerns me, and I really, really believe in Doug Peterson, and I think I don't know. I look at what he did with with the Eagles in that situation when he won that Super Bowl and had Carson Wentz playing at an MVP level. Trevor Lawrence is better than Carson Wentz when he was in that second year. Same thing. He's definitely better than him, and so that should foreshadow it for you. So I'd say Lawrence, but I'm hoping it's Herbert.
Right.
But I'm really confident that Lawrence is going to be really good. Herbert, it's a gamble. It's me more so hoping that he fulfills the potential he has, because he totally could be incredible. It should be, if you look at what his rookie year was. So, and the last player I want to talk about is David Montgomery, which directly ties into one of my players that I think is a little bit overrated because of this reason. I think he's going to get the same opportunities as Jamal Williams in the red zone, and I think he could potentially capitalize on that because super talented back, really, really strong, low center of gravity. And I would love to see him kind of fulfill that potential that he's had since his rookie year. He has insane flashes. Some of the plays he makes are really, really next level. And he has a really, really good spin move. That's pretty entertaining. And I think he's going to reap the benefits of this highly anticipated Lions season. But at the same time, and this is what I was about said earlier when Kyle was talking about drafting Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that the fact that the fact that Jamal Williams got so much workload on just like kind of like ISO run plays in the red zone, and it was very obvious what they were doing. And of course, teams still couldn't stop it. They knew what was going to happen, and they couldn't stop it. And at the end of the day, that's just smash mouth football. But an entire offseason and summer and experience against that, I think, just from a division standpoint, teams are going to scheme for that, and I don't think it's going to be as successful, even if that's David Montgomery back there. I mean, it's pretty hard to replicate 15-plus touchdowns from one back. Just at the end of the day, it is.
Yeah.
So I actually kind of want to retract my statement that I was going to say about Jahmyr Gibbs being an overrated player, because I really think they're going to have to end up getting a little more creative in the red zone because of other teams scouting that. And so I could see Gibbs getting more opportunities than everyone anticipates. I don't know if it's going to be the exact same. Like the league changes, and it changes fast, and it's a copycat league, but they solve things quick. If you go back and you think about like Seahawks cover 3, like the Legion of Boom type stuff, like everyone in the league started doing that, and then all of a sudden it became obsolete to some degree. And then like Chiefs crossers, like they're like crossing scheme. Everyone in the league started doing it. It's still really, really effective, but it's slowly starting to dwindle its way out a little bit. That's just the way the league works. And smash mouth football, giving the guy the ball at the line like that is definitely a little bit different. But that's just a little bit of prediction on my end. But yeah, so and then we'll transition to overrated players. With that being said, and I just kind of gave my thoughts on Jahmyr Gibbs, so I won't fully go back onto that, but I'll just say my last overrated player, which is I think to some degree DK Metcalf. I think with Jackson Smith and Jigba coming in, I think there's just target shares getting taken away, and I just haven't seen as much nuanced development in his route running ability and game as I would have liked to since his rookie year. But at the same time, just being such a freak athlete, the freak athlete that he is, I think in his future there's a 1,200, 1,300 yard season where he's just an absolute monster. Could be this year. It could be in the near future. So same time, I could be wrong about that. But Kyle, who are your overrated players?
Yeah, so I just want to say I do like all these players. I think they're all good. I just think from a fantasy standpoint, I think they're being overdrafted to one extent or another. And my 4 overrated players are Josh Jacobs, Travis Etienne, Christian Watson, and Treylon Burks. So Josh Jacobs, the thing with him, I mean, he hasn't had a bad year of fantasy up to this point. He's had, I think he's 5 years into his career, maybe 4 maybe. But
2 years ago, he was horrible.
2 years ago, I had him 2 years ago, and that was
was like 3 yards a carry. He was like, I don't remember the exact yards per carry, but it was like bottom of the league, like close to bottom of the starters in the league.
Was that when he was drafted top 12 and then he kind of busted? And then next year, yeah. Right.
Let's verify.
And then
I'll verify. You keep talking, but I'll go.
Yeah. I just think with fantasy running backs especially, you want to be early on the guy. You don't want to be late on the guy. And I think drafting Josh Jacobs in the second round this year, you're late on him. Like, I just think it's
like
kind of over.
Jonathan Taylor a little bit.
Yeah, like he's not going to replicate the level of production that is kind of justifying a second round ADP. And I just don't see it with him. I have been wrong on him before in the past, especially like last year. Did not think he'd be good at all last year. And he just played his ass off and just played well and was able to kind of do that. But another thing about last year is that he had a very big skew in terms of his production in games that were close and they lost versus games that they won by a decent margin. And I don't expect the Raiders to win many games by a decent margin this year. And I think that hurts a player like Josh Jacobs from a production standpoint. Next player, Travis Etienne. We talked about the Jaguars. I love the Jaguars. I love the 2 guys you talked about, Calvin Ridley and Trevor Lawrence. I think this offense is going to be good. It's going to be improved. And I think the guy who's kind of the odd man out in terms of benefiting from the improvement is Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne doesn't fit the profile of like a workhorse running back. He's more of a gadget guy. He's better in the receiving game than in the running game, I would say. And unfortunately for him, they bring in a rookie running back that is good in the receiving game and the red zone, which is the 2 most valuable kind of parts for fantasy production. I think he's just not going to have enough of a consistent workload to justify his third round ADP. I think he's just being so overdrafted. I think the third round is crazy for him in his situation. I think he very much should be in the next tier of running backs and not taken alongside guys like Jahmyr Gibbs and Najee Harris, in my opinion. It's just too high. There are just better running backs and a lot better receivers in that range. So Travis Etienne, while I think he's a good player, I'm a fan of his game. I don't think they plan on using him to the level that would result in him being an early third round pick. My last two players kind of go together. They're pretty similar. It's Christian Watson and Treylon Burks, both second year receivers, both on questionable passing offenses, I would say. With Christian Watson, I like his talent. I like his upside as a fantasy player. Obviously has a lot of long touchdown potential. The problem is they're going to play slow this year. Jordan Love is not Aaron Rodgers in terms of taking deep shots. At least we think we haven't seen too big of a sample with him. But I don't think this offense suits Christian Watson's production. I don't think this is a good situation for him to kind of smash his ADP. I get the appeal, him being a second round or a second year receiver. That's normally a pretty good profile of players to take. And there are a lot of second year receivers that I really like this year. And obviously 6'4", fast as hell, really athletic, really a player that I like in a vacuum a lot. I'm a big fan of Christian Watson's game. I just think this year's Packers team is going to be a play slow they did this last year with Aaron Rodgers. Do you think they're going to play faster with Jordan Love? I don't think so. I think they're going to want to run the ball. I think they're going to want to run the ball with their two backs. And I think Christian Watson is best in offense, taking a lot of deep shots downfield, getting in shootouts, and I don't really see that as this year's Packers team. Last one, I'll just briefly cover Treylon Burks. I just didn't really like what I saw from Treylon Burks last year. I don't think he looked particularly good when he was the receiver 1 for the Titans, and now he's very much the receiver 2. Long term, I could maybe see the potential in a dynasty league. DeAndre Hopkins probably isn't going to be here for too long, but while he is here, he's very much the alpha receiver. He's very much the one, and I just don't know what Treylon Burks does as the receiver 2 on a low volume passing offense that's going to be decent but not great overall from a touchdown yard standpoint. What does his production look like in that system? I can't imagine it's too great, and there are players that I think it's better to take a shot on with that sixth rounder, younger players or players that are as young, like a George Pickens, for example, that I just think of a lot higher upside. So those are my 4 kind of overdrafted players. Like I said, I like these players in a vacuum. I think they're all talented. I just think their ADPs are too high for their situation and their production, their anticipated production from my perspective. What do you think about those 4?
Yeah, so just to follow up on the thing I was saying about Josh Jacobs 2 years ago. So, yeah, he had 870 yards, only 4 yards a carry, which I think was closer to middle to bottom of the league, and then 9 touchdowns, 54 catches, though. So it wasn't a bad fantasy season by any means. So definitely me saying it's terrible is not substantiated. But the year before that, a lot more attempts, 3.9 yards a carry, though. And but he produces as a fantasy player at the end of the day when he's on the field. So but it's just the yards per carry. So it's more so about the actual football stuff, more so than the fantasy output that I was kind of talking about. But he's really good back, and still I think has a few years of really high level productivity. But Treylon Burks, I agree with. I just didn't see it last year. Could be wrong, but I just didn't see flashes that really made me think differently. And then Christian Watson, I think I initially was liking the position. So I have him in my I'm in a cutthroat league, 18-man league, worst player and worst team in the league gets cut each week, and I have him on that team. And I was really high on him, but I didn't think about what you said about they didn't really throw the ball downfield that much with Rodgers, so why would they do it with Jordan Love? So
yeah,
I really like that perspective, and that makes me definitely second guess that his positioning there. So yeah, and who was the fourth one you said? Sorry,
ETN.
I just couldn't. ETN. Yeah, I like the idea of him taking a leap, but I agree that I just don't think he has the workload archetype.
Yeah.
But maybe his receiving fluctuates and goes up a little bit because he hasn't had that freakish. He's 1 year under his belt of actually playing, but his receiving wasn't where everyone kind of anticipated.
No.
But his potential is there, and he's good enough to do it. So maybe that's another thing that they change in their offense to use him a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. But I agree with the overall rationale of all the dudes you said. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's it for today's episode. Thanks for watching, everybody. We're going to strive to continue to deliver weekly content for you guys. Maybe bi-weekly coming up. I know Trent's super busy starting school. I'm not starting school for another month, but as our kind of weekly schedules change, we'll still try to consistently deliver content. Still in kind of the dog days of sports content. NBA is completely dried up in terms of narratives, in terms of anything going on there. NFL preseason is starting. Fantasy drafts are starting everywhere. Camp is going strong. So we're probably going to stick with that for a while. As preseason ramps up and more quality players are playing, I know we're going to have more and more to talk about. We're going to get more and more excited for the season. And I don't know if you're in any other fantasy leagues, but I have a redraft league in 2 weeks. Really excited for that. That's my highest stakes league in terms of like buy-in. That's the league that I pay the most attention to. I have third overall pick, so we'll probably do a lot of fantasy content coming up. A lot of NFL content predictions. Maybe go through another division as well. But that's all we have for you guys this week. We're looking forward to talking more football as the preseason moves on. And yeah, thanks for watching.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far. I look forward to this every week and keep coming back. Subscribe, like, and comment anything you'd like us to talk about in the near future. Thank you.